While we were in New Orleans, the sirens would go off, and the lights in the city would all go out. And I remember looking outside, and there'd be spotlights going through the air. People were looking for the so-called airplanes that were supposedly overhead. At that time, my dad was working at Higgins Boatyard, which was constructing the landing crafts that the Marines were using to get on shore in the islands in the Pacific. Our lives were spent underneath the house, and when the guys came in, they would sit on the porch together and talk about old times and what have you. And while they were smoking their cigarettes, they would flick the cigarette butts into the ground in front of the porch. My brother would be underneath, and we would sneak out and grab the butts. And when we had what we considered to be enough, we would load our corncob pipes and have smoking tobacco. Later on, we went back up through Rockford, Illinois, and so we started out at grade school, and then eventually we enrolled in Harlem High School, which was at the corner of Harlem and North 2nd. And I remember we would go to school. Instead of going into the classroom, we'd go around the building and stand underneath the open window when she would start taking a roll call. And so when our names were called, we yell out, "Here," what have you. And after that, we took off and went horseback riding. As a result of my studies, I became somewhat popular with the principal. And so we continued to carry on with our mischief and all that stuff. Then I joined the band, went out for football and all that other good stuff. I was on the junior team, and then I was also performing with the band at graduations, and we had a little small group that we started getting engagements to perform at the high schools throughout the area. So high school was a lot of fun for us, I think because we made it fun. And later on, my brother and I joined the Marine Corps Reserves when I was 17 or so. My brother decided to go active duty, and so he signed up. And a year later, I decided to sign up for going on active duty, and I left for the Corps. We always admired my uncle because he was a Marine. The actions he was with in the Marine Corps, he had a number of battle stars that went on the ribbons. So that's primarily the reason why we went in the Marines. And so when I signed up for active duty, I had to go into Chicago and go get our physicals done, and I was accepted. And so we were put up in a shelter overnight, and the next day myself and 8 other individuals from Chicago sent off to San Diego, where I went through boot camp. The reserves, I signed up February 1954, and when I went in active duty, it was February 1955. And so we went to boot camp, went through Camp Matthews firing range, and from there we went to Camp Pendleton through tent camp combat training, where we'd have to map read, go on so-called patrols, use those maps that we were given to find our way from point to point. And Camp Pendleton was a lot of tall mountains. And so we spent an awful lot of time going up and down the mountains. I was the only one out of boot camp to end up having a stripe. And so when we went to tent camp and checked in, I was assigned to the corporal, And he and I ran the company of 5 platoons through basic training. And so I had a little discussion with the guys, telling them that I didn't want anybody slacking off. We had to give them details and tell them where to go in the base and to carry out their the duties that they were assigned. So as it turned out, we did okay on that end of it. So I was congratulated the good job that we had done. Before I was dismissed, the captain told me that he heard good reports on our active duty. He said, "You tell the officer that I told him I wanted you to become right guard. So you tell him that." So when I got discharged and turned in my paperwork and went out to join with the 1st Platoon, I told the officer what I had been told by the captain, and he says, "I already have my TO. Get in line, grab a BIR." He says, "Okay." So I grabbed the BIR and went and stood in line with the others. And when the captain came by to inspect the troops, he saw me standing there with a great big Browning automatic rifle, and he says, "What are you doing there?" "That's what your officer told me to do." He saw me with the Browning automatic rifle, and he says, "I told you to tell the lieutenant that you were supposed to go to a right guard." And the lieutenant said, "Well, I already had my TO already set up, Captain." He said, "Well, I don't really give a damn." So he went and grabbed me. He was a big guy. So he grabbed me by the collar with the utilities, and he literally picked me up with the Browning automatic rifle, and he carried me all the way to the end of the troops. And so he shoved me into the place of the squad leader. And so he said, "Well, if you aren't going to be fire team leader, you're at least going to be squad leader of the 1st Platoon." As a result of that, the lieutenant was a little bit put out because he had been told how to set up his TO. And so every work detail that came up went to the 1st squad of the 1st Platoon. And that's the only squad leader's name he knew. I told the guys that were bitching about that, I said, "Just go ahead and cool it, we'll survive." And the body build on this lieutenant was long on body, short on legs. Now, in a forced march, the standard distance from when you're on a forced march is 30-inch stride. What I did was, instead of a 30-inch, I made it like a 33-inch, just by push my feet a little bit further forward. And the lieutenant could never understand why he always had to run to catch up. And so, like I say, we got our evens. He never did find out what was causing his stress. I just played on his short legs. As it turned out, later on, I was told by the captain to report into where they check you out for a promotion. And so went where they told me, and in that I was the lowliest private there in the group. It was there for consideration for promotion. They finally called me in, and the officers, one officer asked if I liked the Marine Corps. And I told him, well, sir, so far I like it. He said, "Well, are you planning on re-enlisting at the end of your tour?" I said, "Well, you're asking a question that I really can't answer." He said, "I want to get a little background before I give any serious thought to re-enlistment." And so, as a result of that, I was recommended for promotion to corporal. And so, before you know it, I got my corporal stripes and a lot of resentment from the other guys. And from PFC to corporal, which was standard. And then I joined the 1st Marine Division Band. I guess I got into the band, 1st Marine Division Band, because the interviewer asked if I could read music. And I said, "Yeah, I can read music." "Okay, you're headed for band." So that's how I got into the 1st Marine Division Band. I was started out on a B-flat bugle. Then I went to snare drum. And then I ended up with cymbals. And our cymbals were polished to the point where they were like a mirror. We would have a leather band going through the center hole of the cymbal, and that leather band would allow me to flip these cymbals and in time with the music in my area. Major Gilberto said, Giglio, come into my office. So anyway, I sir. So I went into his office, and he says, you're being transferred to Hawaii. He said, but you're coming up for your sergeant stripes. He says, so when you get to Treasure Island, you take your orders in and you give them to the officer of the day and tell him that it's legitimate for you to promote me to my next rank, and it can be done in transit before your actual promotion. And so you can go to Hawaii with sergeant stripes. So as it turned out, I did. I was the youngest, highest ranking individual in his unit. We went traveling throughout the Far East, the West Coast, Alaska, Okinawa, the Philippines, China, and Guam, just to name a few.
So you're going to all these different places. Kind of what are you guys doing in each place?
We were the president's, General Eisenhower, his People to Peoples program. And as musicians, whatever country we went to, like in Japan, we would perform for the country's fairs or their commanders, military commanders, and our own military, as well as the schools, the American schools for the American children.
Today, the big picture of one of America's not-so-secret weapons. The range and power of this weapon is tremendous, even though about all the equipment it needs is a smile and a heart. Right now, wherever American soldiers are assigned, this weapon, friendship, is doing a big task for us as part of the President's concept of building goodwill on a people-to-people level of communication.
Our day consisted of falling out in the morning, going to the base flag and playing performing for the colors. And then people who were visiting the base would come out and watch us as we marched back to where we were billeted. And we had an awful lot of those people that would come on base just to watch the morning and evening services. And anyway, we were in the Philippines, and I think that's where I lost most of my hair, because the temperature was 110 degrees in the shade. And when you had to wear a barracks cap, there was very, very little ventilation. So being out in the sun almost cooked your head. And hair started coming out. The Marines that were stationed at the embassy had us come to their house where they were billeted, and we helped them destroy their supply of alcoholic beverages. While we were helping the Marines, myself and the Master Sergeant, he was savvy. Anyway, he says, come on, Giglio, let's get back to the base. And I said, how are we going to do that? He said, we'll take a pedicab. He got inside the cab, and he couldn't get the thing to move because Nichols was so heavy. And so Nichols got out and told the guy you get in back, I'll drive. And I wasn't about to be outdone, and if the Master Sergeant could do it, I could do it. And so both drivers were in the back now. We took off, and you had to go up an incline, and then the the road back to the base was a full circle. And so we got up on top. We were traveling along pretty good. And, well, getting down off of that circle road that went around the city, you went down a long sloping hill. As Nichols turned into the road going down into the city, with his weight, he started picking up speed. And he yelled out, he says, "Hey, did you find out how to stop these damn things?" And I said, "No." "Well, how do we stop them?" I said, "Well, put your feet on, I see the guys put their feet in the rubber tire in front." I says, "I guess that's what we'll have to do." He says, "Like hell." He says, "Let's find another way." And I says, "Well, I don't know how we're going to be able to do that." I yelled at him. I said, "Nick, we're starting to go too fast. There's a curve down there. I don't think we're going to make it. And I don't know how to slow these damn things down." He said, "We'll have to do what we can." And so as we're getting closer to the bottom, going as fast as we are, and I says, "You got to stop. Slow down, Nick, or otherwise we aren't going to make it." So as we came down to the bottom, and we went through the shelving and the wooden planks and plywood that made up their home. We ended up in this guy's bedroom, apparently. And with the pedicab drivers and the people that were actually living in the house, they were all jibber-jabbing. We couldn't speak their language. And so while they were still arguing with each other, I looked at Nick, and Nick said, "Come on, let's get out of here, come on." So we walked out through the hole that we created. We performed for General Magsaysay of the Philippines, President Garcia of the Philippines. And while we were in the Philippines, we also flew to Formosa, where we performed for General Chiang Kai-shek at a secret location whereby we were put in the buses and we were transported in circles, I believe, to make sure that no one was following us. When we left the Philippines, we flew into Formosa, and from there we went to Okinawa. After each performance, we were given tea, and I got to the point where couldn't stand the tea that we had to drink, and you had to be courteous enough to be able to drink it all and not offend those who were giving the party. We got dressed and went to the diner, and they set us up for a banquet. And as the people brought the food out, they started out with soup. As we were using our chopsticks, we were moving the food around in the bowl of water. And one of the guys started poking it into it. And anyway, whatever he was into got stuck on the end of the chopstick. And so he slowly pulled it up. And there was a chicken head, complete, including the feathers. And before we went to any banquet or whatever, we were always told, don't ask what's in the food. Another guy, when they cooked chicken soup, got a chicken foot on his chopstick. And then all of a sudden we were brought another course of food, and there was lumps of meat that had been cooked. And they looked like little meatballs. And so anyway, one of the guys finally got guts, and he says, "What?" Asked the server, What is this? What is this?" He said, "Those are monkey." "What do you mean monkey?" He says, "Well, those are testes, from the monkey, from the male." And everybody sort of dropped their chopsticks, and we sort of gave up on that evening's meal. From that time on, we would eat the broth, but we wouldn't eat the food. And then we were flown to Japan. And that's when I noticed as we were coming into Japan, you could see Japan on the horizon. But you can also smell Japan because their sewer system is where they would dump the slop into what they call a benjo ditch along the side of the roadway. And a bunch of guys started talking about, let's go get us a bicycle. So you could actually go to a bicycle shop and rent the bicycle. And then we played chicken. And in playing chicken, two of us, go side by side, and we would try to drive the other off into the benjo ditch. And to my knowledge, I don't think anyone ever found out how deep they really were. But I know it was foul smelling when you opened up the crust that was on top of the benjo ditch. After our Japanese tour, we were taken to Hiroshima to see the aftermath. And from Hiroshima, we went to Nagasaki. And there they had a museum or a display of the injuries. And this one sake bottle was melted down with the individual's hand inside the glass, where the atomic bomb had disintegrated what was left of his body. And we were taken to this church, and the blast from the atomic bomb literally melted the stucco. And around the time that the priest came out of the church, he dropped his Bible and was bending over, picking it up when the bomb went off. The shape of his body was in the stucco, where whatever white silk he was wearing was reflected away from his body. We were taken to the hospital where the young was being treated, and they were required to do that as long as the victims survived. The ground at ground zero was primarily nothing but a gravel surface. Many of them were cindered as a result of the heat. Their bodies actually melted, and there was a lot of patterns on the surface of a lot of the tissue that the survivors had on their body. And so it was quite tragic how that bomb affected so many of the citizens. The thing that got me was, while on Okinawa, it was cold, so cold that wet fingers on metal garbage cans would stick through the sides. And I remember working one day and coming outside, and there was a little boy and a girl was older than the little boy. And both of them were wearing canvas dresses with no shoes. And they had to be colder than all get out. Eventually came my turn to be transported back to Treasure Island for my discharge from the services. We have no idea how many miles we flew to all those countries. I guess the people to people's program was, as far as I was concerned, at an end. The guys would come into my office. They would call their girlfriends and what have you on the islands. And one evening about 10:30, the phone rang. I answered the phone by saying, "Home of the brave, one of the heroes speaking, sir." And so this colonel, I recognized his voice. What was that? I said, oh, here goes my phone. So I said, Fleet Marine Force Pacific Drum and Bugle Team, Sergeant Giglio speaking, sir. No. What was that you said earlier? And I said, okay, here's where it goes. And I said, home of the brave, one of the heroes speaking, sir. And he burst out laughing. He said, I'm going to have to remember that one. So that was some of the deals that we got into. The guys in our unit was a lot of fun to be with. No college could offer me the education that I was provided for by the Marine Corps. It was an education in itself. So I have no qualms. And I often wondered, had I not got out of the service, what I would have become. All I know is that Vietnam was around the corner. And my next duty station would possibly be Vietnam. We performed for the first annual audience awards. We were on stage with Eddie Fisher, Debbie Reynolds, and Debbie, cute little thing, was backstage with him. Then when we were done with the performing, they broke us up and had us sit throughout the ballroom or whatever. The table I was told to sit at was with Donna Reed and a couple other starlets or whatever. And we were playing before the Chinese theater for the Heaven Knows Mr. Allison. While we were in formation in front of the Chinese theater, Elvis Presley with his pink Cadillac was going back and forth, and the women were literally chasing the car as he was driving up Hollywood Boulevard. We were finally done, and the Marine Corps had us at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood. And after we changed into our civvies, we headed for the bar. So while I was in the bar, in comes Elvis Presley. He sat at the end of the bar with his security sitting on either side of him. And while I'm sitting there, I'm looking over at him and I tell him, you know, I don't like that crap that you sing, that rock and roll crap. He looked at me and he said, well, I'm not I don't really either, but it does pay the bills. And I said, well, you got a point there. And I said, okay, if it was your druthers, what would you rather perform? He says, ballads and religious songs. I told him, I said, well, I can appreciate that. So anyway, that was a 4-year stint. My promotions came easy. When I got out of the service, I received my last promotion to staff sergeant. After I got out of the service, I wanted to become an accountant. So I opened up my office services, my accounting practice, and I got a call to an attorney's office and was told that the attorney had a client that was starting an ambulance service and he needed some accounting. I ended up getting on the board of directors. I found out that this guy was taking the money that he was paid for the trips in his own, putting it into his pocket. And so we had a meeting with this clown and we gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. Became an officer of the corporation and president, and we introduced the first ambulance in the city of Rockford. And I'd already gone to St. Anthony Hospital and became a paramedic while I was still practicing my tax law. And that again was a lot of stories. That was another interesting part of my life. I did all this while I was still practicing my tax accounting, and I had a pretty good practice by the time I got done with it.
When I was older, around my younger teenage years, my father was home watching a movie about war. Me wanting to watch something more to my liking, I asked, can't we watch something else? Instead of telling me that it was his house and he paid the bills, he said to me in his no-nonsense voice, sternly, told me, "Why don't you sit down? You might learn something." He wasn't asking, but more like an order. I have actually grown to love history. Between traveling and living, history fascinates me. We now watch the movies together. We also visited Chattanooga, Tennessee multiple times and visited Missionary Ridge, the battlefield, and we walked through the battleground where we were able to through the tour. Seeing it firsthand gives you a more greater appreciation. I also have learned that a person can always learn. No job is too small. We learn in everything we do. It will still help us along the way. I learned we don't judge people. My father, being the owner of the ambulance service, hired men and women and all ethnicities. They were hired on merit, not color or creed. The ambulance business got my father to become present at races, dirt track, mopeds, football, drum and bugle corps, Phantom Regiment, and even NASCAR. At the Phantom Regiment competitions at Boylan High School, I was on the sidelines with my mom with my little white ambulance windbreaker. All in all, I learned to be compassionate, to help others, because we don't know what they are going through and struggling with. I have realized we need to do what we can to help our community by getting involved, volunteering, and voting. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Giglio, I can sincerely say that doing your documentary has been one of the great honors of my life so far. I have learned not only your story, but more about life than I ever could through any other class. You helped me understand the value of sacrifice and the necessity of a laugh every once in a while. I laughed more working on your doc than I have doing any other project. I will always remember the stories you shared with us in your interview and the poems you wrote while you were overseas. In fact, my family knows you as Johnny Giggles because when I first watched your interview, I wasn't quite sure how to say your last name, but you made me laugh a lot, so I gave you the nickname before ever meeting you. I'm so glad I decided to take that doc, but I'm even more thankful for you sharing your story with us. On the list of veterans for the year, I saw that you were in band, and I was instantly interested. Constantly being surrounded by music my entire life, I knew I was able to connect with you in a way that I wouldn't with other vets. On top of music, I've always had an affinity towards humor and storytelling. The way you delivered your stories reminds me of my late grandfather, so thank you for making me feel at home. I can't tell you the amount of nights I stayed up later than I should have, or cried about the stress of making sure that this documentary is perfect for you. I so desperately want you, your daughters, and future Giglio generations to be able to watch this and remember the great sacrifice that you made. I hope I preserve not only your stories, but your personality, your charisma, your charm, and eternal youth. But most importantly, I hope I have somehow captured the essence of a man that I will cherish for the rest of my life. I'm so grateful to have had the pleasure of doing your doc. I can't thank you enough.